And I'd like to introduce our final speaker, Dr. Abdul Dardari. Dr. Dardari is a member of the Parliament of Egypt, of the Freedom and Justice Party, and has served on the Foreign Relations Committee. Dr. Dardari obtained his PhD from the University of Pittsburgh, and he claims to be an academician by profession and politician by necessity. He is also an assistant professor of cultural studies, while also a founding member of the Parliamentarians Against the Coup, the president of the Egyptian Student Association, and the president of the Muslim Student Association. Dr. Dardari is currently dedicating his life to work for democracy and human rights for all.
Thank you. I am really happy that I am invited here today by such a prestigious university. Thank you as professors in this university. Thank you, Dr. Riggs, for inviting me. Thank you all for coming to listen to the situation of human rights and democracy in Egypt. Thanks to the activists coming from New York and New Jersey for such a particular event. I would like to start by quoting Dr. Riggs defining the role of the university here. He says, "We view the mission of the university as providing a safe and open forum to express different viewpoints and opinions without fear of repression or attack. This is what I personally hope that all Egyptian universities will be able to reach that level, not only Egyptian universities, but also Egypt itself. Because what is happening now, there is an attempt to create a state of fear, so that, as you heard, the young leaders for the future are saying there is a lot being done, putting thousands, killing thousands, so that they instill fear in the hearts and minds of young Egyptians, so that we live under Mubarak too, and we cannot really express our desire for freedom and justice and rule of law. Let us not make a mistake and calling the conflict in Egypt between the military and the Muslim Brotherhood. It is not. Let us not forget the fact that the Muslim Brotherhood came to power only through election. So anyone talking about the Muslim Brotherhood as that it grabbed the power, it did not. It was voted in fair and free election that was certified by all other international organizations in the country. So what is the conflict in Egypt? The conflict in Egypt is between freedom and oppression. Between, you can call it the oligarchy, you can call it, I call it militocracy, and by military, it is not democracy at all. What we have in Egypt is a militocracy. It is the rule of the military, for the military, by the military. And the majority of Egyptians, they would like us to live as second-class citizens in our own country, so that we cannot demand our rights, we cannot ask for equality, we cannot participate in fair and free election. But how can we categorize the political structure or the state structure in Egypt? I can specify 5 criteria. The first is we have a political system that is very oppressive. We lived in Egypt for 70-some years under British colonialism. After the British left, the foreign colonialism, it changed into local colonialism. It is the same colonizers, but they have a different name and a different color. They're Egyptians now. That's what I call the military. After the British left, Egypt was ruled by the military for the past 60-some years. And that is the tragedy. The first president died, another military president came. And then the second president passed away, a third military. So this journey, this process of having military leader, there is no transparency, there is no accountability, of course there is no freedom, there is no rule of law. The military and the police are almost above the law. And then everyone else is under the law. And that is creating a serious problem. So on the political level, we have a very oppressive, very dictatorial in nature system that has been going on for decades now, for the past almost 200 years. In the last 60 years, we've had it under the military rule. That is the first characteristic. The second characteristic is social oppression. The state structure, what does the state do? It pits certain social groups against other social groups so that it can succeed in controlling. You know the divide and conquer policy of the original colonizers. Now we have the local colonizers using the same policy, putting Copts against Muslims, and then pitting now Muslims against Copts. And by this, they can always justify their repression, they can always justify their control of the social space. And then the social groups fail to communicate successfully with each other. That is the second component of the regime in Egypt, or the state in Egypt. The third is economic oppression. Economic benefits, or the business community, is in the hands of the few. It's amazing situation in Egypt where you find not only millionaires, but you find billionaires. And then at the same time, you find graveyard dwellers. It's amazing phenomenon in Cairo that you find human beings. When the night falls, they go and they spend their nights, sleep in the graveyards. In a country where many millionaires and some billionaires, in a country that is a rich country, that it failed, the state failed completely from the economic perspective to provide a decent alternative to the people of Egypt. This is the third characteristic. The fourth characteristic is, you will be surprised about it. It is, I call it religious corruption. And by religious corruption, it provides what I characterize as false spirituality. And it is not surprise when the coup leader made the coup on July 3rd. Do you remember he had on his right and on his left the leader of the Coptic Church and also the leader of the Sufi Al-Azhar institution. And I would really like you to think a lot. Why did the Coptic leader, the Coptic Pope, was there in support of an oppressive military regime? And why was the head of Al-Azhar, the Sufi institution, was there? How did they just, not only that they were there, but they continued supporting dictatorship and oppression throughout the country until today. There are marches every day, and the fatwas that are coming from both the Coptic Church and from the Sufi Azhar institution are asking the Egyptians to accept the status quo. And this reminds me of something that happened in France. You remember the French used to say, man will never be free until the last king is strangled with entails of the last priest. When I can read this with an Egyptian translation, I will say, man, the Egyptians will never be free until the last general is strangled with the entails of the last priest or imam. In this case, because we have false priests and false imams who are justifying oppression in the country. And that is false religion, because it leads people now, they say, let the politicians control their bodies, we will control their souls. And that is both anti the ideals of political space, at the same time anti the ideals of spiritual space. I was told that last month or so you had an event here about ISIS. And maybe some of you expected me to talk about ISIS one way or the other. For me, ISIS is a symptom of a real problem. And you know what the real problem is? It is still an ISIS, but you need to read it backwardly. Can you read it? Can you try to read it? Yes. That is the real problem. Because oppression, dictatorship, leads to extremism. And when people are extremists, when young people do not have a space to exert their energy, either they go into drugs, and they can easily become violent, or they go into violence. And they can find many justifications because there are oppressions that are going on. When, for example, the elected president that we Egyptians elected him. There was only one way to remove him, through another election. And I believe if they remain for another 3 years from President Morsi, while the whole deep state is working against him, most likely he was not going to be re-elected again. But at least I personally would prefer anyone else to be elected in free and fair election, but not to kidnap the president, kidnap his aides, kill literally thousands of people in the streets. Rabaa massacre that we all talked about today, it is considered to be the worst killings in modern times of peaceful demonstrators. This is according to Human Rights Watch. Not only that, but also imprisoning thousands of Egyptians. Today we're talking about 42,000 of Egyptians are imprisoned as political prisoners. Now let us look at the numbers. About 2,188 students arrested. 90 of them are female students. And you know what happens when they arrest women? That is very new to Egyptians. 2,000 students are injured, about 200 are killed, about 200 university professors are in the jail of Egypt. Just last 2 weeks, a university professor, and let me mention his name, by the name of Dr. Tariq, he was bleeding. And he was left to bleed for 6 hours until he passed away. This professor did nothing wrong. He was just taken to the prison because he had an Islamist tendencies. And this is not enough reason to put him in jail, and they did not release him until he was killed and they took home. It looks very gloomy situation. I am not at all pessimistic. I would like through you to send a message of encouragement and support to the Egyptians who have been going in the past year and a half and insisting on being in the streets, resisting the status quo and resisting the military. They really deserve your encouragement and your support. Now, what is the solution? This is the problem that we all, or most of us, will agree on. What is the solution? You remember when we Egyptians were fed up on January 25th, 2011. What did we do? We went to the streets as one united community in Egypt. We went together demanding 4 things. You remember them: عيش, حرية, عدالة اجتماعية, كرامة إنسانية. Economic prosperity. And economic prosperity will never take place unless we are free. Freedom. And when we have freedom, we will be able to have social justice. And when we have all these 3, then we will be able to have human dignity. This is the Egyptian revolution. It is very important that we inculcate those 4 principles so that we can live them again and again, so that we can bring them back. Now I conclude by the following. So now I am very proud that the young Egyptian leaders now, in my age, we used to say, walls have ears, so don't speak loudly. But now, the students are saying, هنحبط الإحباط. We're going to frustrate frustration. And they say, despair is treason. Al-Ya'su khiyana. This is the new language now of Egyptians. Egyptians are going on a daily basis demanding the rights, demanding the right to live free, the right to live under the rule of law, demanding their equality. I conclude by having few messages. The first message is to Egyptians. Let me first address the Egyptians back home in Egypt. I tell the Egyptians, I was in the British Parliament, and one of the members of the Parliament told me that send this message to the Egyptian people, that you have won the moral war. What you need to do now is to continue resisting the existing regime until you achieve your political freedom. That is very important that the Egyptian people know in Egypt that what they're doing for the past year and a half is really sending very positive message to the people all over the world. That those people go every day. Can you imagine every day, while there are 40,000 are in jail, and many thousands are killed. And the possibility of being killed or injured or put in jail is very high in Egypt. If I were to speak like this in the university, most 100% I will be arrested and put in jail, I don't know for how long. To the Egyptian people, I say continue. There is no other way. We should never accept going back to the police state. We have to get rid of fear. Fear is a crime. We need really to fight fear so that we can prove success, and we want the same four principles: economic prosperity, freedom, social justice, and human dignity. To the Egyptian community in the United States, those who choose to live here, most likely you choose to live here because of the freedom, because of the rule of law, because of the justice that you witness and you live, because of the safety, that you can speak your mind, and most likely you will go home freely, and no one will question you as long as you express your own. The freedom of speech is guaranteed here. I call upon the members of the Egyptian community, let us help back home country to live the ideals of the American culture. Let us help the people in Egypt to live this freedom of speech, this freedom of expression, this freedom of association, so that they can create the economic prosperity, they can create the social justice, and they can create the human dignity. And the last message for Egypt, for the students, because I used to teach in Egypt, and I know how the students feel. I think the students in Egypt now are not only teaching the world, but they're teaching their own professors that there is price for freedom. And they're teaching really the whole world and saying, we're not going to take it. And look at the examples of Omar and Abdullah and everyone who lived that experience, saying, I have changed a lot. Now, I am not the center of my attention. No, the whole world, that I am becoming more caring and more interested in humanity than before. The second message is to the Americans. The first message is to the American academia. I thank you for being here. I would really like you to invite Egyptians to speak about the situation in Egypt. I would like you to help your students to understand what is really going on in Egypt. For the American students, you can do a lot by joining hands with the Egyptian students, participating in events related to Egypt. You can do a lot so that you can send a message that we as human beings, regardless what religion we have, what color we have, what language we speak, regardless of anything, that we believe in the universal rights of human beings, that we believe in freedoms, all types of freedom, that we believe in equality for all, that we believe in the rule of law. For the American administration, I still hope the American administration will realize before it is too late that supporting dictatorship is not the solution. If we're really serious about fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda, we need to fight the root of the problem. It is dictatorship. It is oppression. You cannot support Sisi and claim to be working or supporting democracy, human rights, and rule of law. Sisi has killed so many